for this conference. So I've been having continuous Zoom calls and podcasts and everything. So I hope I'm at the top of my game, but
you are at the top of your game.
It will be what it will be, you know.
This moment right here, right now, you are unequivocally at the top of your game.
Well, that's all right. Good. If you think so, then I'm happy with that.
Indeed. So now you've been someone who's been aware of the potential healing benefits of these plants for so many years. I want to speak to the frustration that you've felt knowing how beneficial these things could be and knowing the legal system that's been in place to keep these things prohibited and outlawed. I mean, how have you managed just that frustration, and how has that impacted your view of the world and view of our government and view of the system in general?
Well, that's a deep question. You know, as you know, the psychedelics are a multi-layered thing, and you know, they touch on every aspect of existence, and you cannot really separate them from the science and the spiritual, and unfortunately the political context. You know, I don't have to tell you that both drug education and drug regulation in this country is a complete joke. Mm-hmm. You know, and it is at least half the problem, you know, in terms of the way that we relate to these substances and many other substances. You know, I mean, humans have been co-evolving with psychoactive plants, psychedelic plants for thousands of years. You know, and somehow we've managed to do that without the FDA. You know, I mean, how is that? How could that be that we're even still here? The FDA was not here to tell us what to do and tell us what we couldn't do, largely, and yet here we are. You know, and I think it's a question of, I think we're learning. I think that people, you know, in their personal relationships with these plants and these substances are way beyond medicine and certainly regulation. You know, I think one of the things that's made the difference in the current historical epoch is we've had 40 years to figure out how to use these things. You know, back in the 60s, LSD came into our culture. It was like a bomb dropped into society. We had no context for it, and everybody freaked out. You know, everybody freaked out. This is either a horrible threat or it's the greatest thing since life sliced bread. You know, and it was a very polarized situation. I think now, you know, because they have not gone away, we've been forced to, and you know, we have developed ways to use these things in beneficial ways, and you know, we know how to do this now much more. You know, despite what the government, you know, it's not, we're not looking to the government actually for this. We're looking mainly back to indigenous traditions.
Sure. And it may have been 40 years that we figured out how to have the proper balanced relationship with these plants, but as you mentioned, indigenously, we're talking thousands of years of lineage. I mean, no one knows exactly how far back the utilization of ayahuasca for tribes like the Shipibo really goes, but you know, estimates.
Yeah, and that's what saved us, is the fact that we could look to these older traditions, and you know, you'd say, well, how did they do it? You know, and not necessarily that you can just imitate that or mimic that, because we're not Shipibo, we're not indigenous, but we can learn from them. We can develop our own paradigms, you know, and we can also, you know, we can take what we know from those aspects of culture, we can combine them with scientific data, medical data, and, you know, we're developing a new paradigm.
Yeah. And now, for the first time, you know, I think there's a real sense of optimism. I mean, I just returned from the Psychedelic Science Conference, and seeing that psilocybin and MDMA are entering phase 3 trials. We've already gotten clear on religious grounds, at least, for some utilization of ayahuasca in the States, some utilization of peyote. It seems like the climate is, and then obviously marijuana, not to be overlooked, is
No.
steaming towards recreational legalization nationally. I mean, all of these things could get disrailed, but for finally, there's a sense of progress and optimism. Is this something that you expected, or is this a pleasant surprise?
It's actually kind of a pleasant surprise in some ways. I mean, it's both. I'm not surprised in that it was inevitable. I am, but I didn't really expect it to happen so quickly. I mean, I think you've seen major changes in the last even couple of years, especially as some of these studies have come out, and and then the publicity around ayahuasca, and I think people have a sense. There's a certain sense of desperation, in a sense, in society. People are hurting. Spiritual suffering is great because people don't have any trust in their spiritual institutions anymore. I mean, normally back in the day, you'd look to the church. Well, the church is, I'm sorry, it's about as irrelevant as politics. I mean, it's, in a sense, it does not provide any spiritual satisfaction. Churches are largely just another instrument for mind control, behavior control. The last thing the church wants you to do is to have a genuine mystical experience. That's very dangerous. So people are forced to look outside their cultural context, and I think that's a big measure. That's what's driving people to go to South America, or they're looking for something meaningful in their lives because our lives are so bereft of meaning.
It's interesting. It's almost as if the challenges of our current social paradigm. I mean, you look back, anthropologically, and if someone is spending most of their days out in nature, very few distractions, hunting, gathering, sitting by the streams, following the circadian rhythms. I mean, this was life for most of our evolution. You can probably get away with not having, even though all evidence supports the fact that they were using psychedelics, you can probably get away with a little bit less. But now, with the hectic pace of our lives, we need stronger measures to start to heal these trauma and psychological conditions that have arisen because of the dynamic shift in our world that our human organism is not really that capable to handle.
Right. And I think that I mean, I'm fond of saying, remember that we're not running the show, right? The ayahuasca always reminds me of this. Remember, you monkeys are not running this show. And in fact, we're not running the show, but it's easy to be deluded that we are.
Oh, that's so much better when you can take that pressure off. Damn.
And the plants are running the show.
Right.
And I mean, and thank God, because the plants are sustaining life on Earth. But what I think is going on here, Aubrey, is that on some level, it's a rapid social change as we move into really what's a kind of a post-information, and I would say even a post-historical culture. But there is also a co-evolutionary aspect to this, and that's where I think the real action is. But that's in the background. We've been co-evolving with these plants for as long as we've been here, and they're influencing the evolution of consciousness, and they always have. This is where we've learned from these plants things like agriculture and writing and chemistry and many things. The indigenous people say they're plant teachers. And now I think as we collectively, and I think the planet as well collectively, senses that we're in a critical juncture historically and even geologically and biologically, because we're you know, we're manipulating forces on the planet that normally keep things in balance. You know, the planet is all about feedback loops and equilibrium. We're capable of disrupting those in serious ways now. You know, I mean, ways that it can't fix. Normally it can return to equilibrium and it's like, oh, the monkeys are, you know, off there doing their thing. We're now able to seriously damage those mechanisms. And the planet is responding by saying, wake up. And it's doing it through these tools. I think many things come out of the sort of global relationship with, you know, global culture's relationship with these plants, but it's a co-evolutionary aspect in many ways. And the plants, the indigenous people say the plants are teaching us.
Sure.
I totally believe that. And the plants are teaching us. They are plant teachers. You know, and
so for people who are listening and being like, plants are teaching you, what are these kooks talking about? And you know, those are probably people who haven't experienced, you know, the ayahuasca setting and ceremony where you really feel like you're in communication, sometimes direct communication with an intelligence much higher than. And where, you know, I'm open to the theory that this is just unlocking the higher faculties of our brain or some aspect like that. It genuinely feels like it's far beyond the scope, at least of our normal waking consciousness or anything that we've come in touch with. The creativity, the knowledge, the wisdom, even sometimes the humor, you know, they're funnier than we've ever been in our life, you know. Fact, to come out of this, you start to see. And I think the best explanation that I heard is, you know, imagine a being of such superior intelligence and benevolence that for them to manifest in physical reality as a human wouldn't even make any sense. They had to manifest as something a lot more stable, a lot more ever present, you know, and so they manifested in plant forms. And that's where you get this idea of plant teachers, an evolved consciousness so great that, you know, going inside a human with all of its capricious and emotional and flamboyant nature wouldn't even make any sense. You know, what makes a lot more is to come to polarity, come to this existence as a plant. And that's a theory that, you know, whether you want to believe the literal idea of it or you just want to take it as metaphor, at least as pure metaphor, it makes the most sense to me.
Right. Well, you know, everything's metaphor, right? I mean, everything is relative in a certain way, but I think that you know, you're probably familiar with the work of Michael Pollan, the writer, and he writes very clearly and eloquently, I think, about plant intelligence. You know, this is a real thing. I mean, a few years ago, you'd be laughed off the stage at the very suggestion. Now we can actually study plant intelligence. They're intelligent. They're not intelligent the way we are, you know, but they are definitely intelligent and they have behavior. If intelligence is the ability to relate to your environment in such a way that you optimize your existence, then a plant's intelligent.
Yeah.
You know, because that's what they do. And they do it largely through this language that they speak, which is chemistry, right? And through chemistry, they've mastered this miracle, this interesting thing of photosynthesis. Not only can they use sunlight and carbon dioxide and water to make all their food and food for everything else, but then just out of sheer exuberance or creativity, they can make all these compounds that essentially is the language of plants. And it relates to, it's the medium by which they relate to everything else in the environment, other plants, fungi, microorganisms, animals, and us, you know, and they have spun out these interesting neurotransmitter-like compounds, you know, which existed in the plants before they existed in us. So, but they have this signal transduction function, and that is how they, you know, how they manifest their minds. You may know Stephen Buhner's work. He's written many interesting books, but one of them is called Plant Intelligence in the Imaginal Realm. And that's his latest one. It totally blew my mind. But the point he makes, and I think it's a good one, is that, you know, we're mammal chauvinists or something. We insist that if there's no complex nervous system, there can't be intelligence. You've got to have a brain to be intelligent. Turns out brains are overrated. What you have to have is complex networks of intercommunication, signal transduction systems, and feedback. That happens in many instances in nature, and it's not necessarily associated with nervous systems. You know, the reason our brain is remarkable is because we have this multi-connected, hyper-connected, you know, piece of tissue that's jammed into a very small space. So it's impressive in that respect. But in an old growth forest system or an ecosystem the size of the Amazon rainforest, for example, that's a neural network too. You know, it is regulated by feedback and signal transduction processes, which is fundamental in biology. Signal transduction processes are processes of communication, obviously, but specifically mediated by chemical messengers. And that's what the brain is, right? It runs on chemical messengers, neurotransmitter. Forests do too. Just about every complex system you look at, from the microscopic to the macroscopic, is regulated by these signal transduction networks, which is why nature is inherently intelligent.
Undoubtedly, and you just make a really eloquent case for intelligence in this dimensional plane. And then if you're willing to take that leap that we are multi-dimensional beings, and then you start to encounter intelligence that's of a different sort, that's something that all the, you know, the indigenous cultures talk about very openly and talk about as if it is reality and a fact of their existing paradigm, that you can actually communicate with these plants and learn from them directly in other dimensional realities. And that, again, for someone who's never experienced it, it sounds crazy. But once you've actually been there and talked to the shamans, worked with the plants, and had intelligence come not just from the psychedelic plants, but, you know, the tradition of the dieta, of learning from all of the different plant spirits, whether they're psychoactive or not. Part of the indigenous culture. And I've experienced that personally. I've gone on dieta and had an interaction with a completely non-psychoactive plant that taught me as many things about life as any wise teacher, grandfather, book has ever taught me. And it's really interesting when you start to just open your mind to the reality that we may be part of multiple different realities, this being one, whatever you want to call that other space that we enter. And psychedelics seem to be the chakaruna, the bridge to those other realities. You know, whatever is there also allows intelligence to express in different ways. And that's where it gets really interesting. And I think you open yourself up for, you know, quantum advancements in knowledge, awareness, and consciousness.
Yeah, that's true. You know, I mean, you referred to it a couple of times, and I think this is one of the problems in having the discussion, because there are two kinds of people in this world: those who have been beyond the chrysanthemum, as it were, and those who haven't. And those who haven't, we can't really have a discussion with them,
right?
Because they don't know what they're talking about, you know, and they think they do, but they don't. And so it's like, well, you know, they're like the people, the opticians, you know, that ground Galileo's lenses for the telescope, but refused to look through it, you know, because they knew that they were going to see something that they shouldn't see. And so you can't do much with those people, except you can say, you know, go educate yourself. I mean, go learn about this stuff, and mostly find the courage to have the experience. Then we'll have the conversation. Otherwise, you know, there's not a lot you can say, because they don't get it, you know.
Yeah.
And so we just have to hope that more people do. And I I mean, we all have a mission, right? And people like you and Joe Rogan, and I suppose myself to a certain degree, I feel like if you look at all the things going on in the world and what our best hope is, I think our best hope is to reconnect with these plant teachers, teach other people how to connect with them, bring people to situations where they can connect with them. And, I run ayahuasca ceremonies. I don't do ayahuasca ceremonies, I organize them. I have a curadero that, does a fantastic job. But our approach is, we're not running this. It's the encounter between you, the individual, and the medicine. Our job is to facilitate a optimal space for that to happen, where you're safe, you don't have to worry about those issues, and then step back and let the teacher teach you, let the student learn directly. Because that's the thing about the psychedelic experience. It is quintessentially individual. No one can have it for you. Mm-hmm. And that's the big thing.
Yeah. What is it? And I know, your brother had talked about this, in the past, but what is it in your mind as you've been around this for so many years? What are the main sources of fear preventing people from being willing to take the leap, being willing to look through that telescope, that's right, available? There's some prohibitive laws, but if you really want to, anybody can find the way. Right. To look through the telescope. What are the main things preventing people? What are the fears that you see?
I think, as you say, I think the legal prohibition has very little to do with it. Everybody's going to find a way to do what they want to do, whether it's legal or not. This is, these laws are, absurd from the start. None of this stuff should be prohibited in this way. I just think people are, they don't want to step out of their comfort zone. That's basically what it is. It's unsettling. And if they're in a certain mindset where they think they pretty much have things figured out, why disturb that? And these will definitely make you question things. Some people do not want to question things. They like it the way it is, even though that may be the thing they need the most in order to move to the next level. But
it's funny, I hear that actually frequently with people who are about to do psychedelics or considering it. They'll have a job that they love, and they're like, "Oh, but I love my job. I don't want to do psychedelics," and find out that I don't want to do. Like, if you love your job, most likely you're not going to get the message to stop doing your job. I mean, right. While that's occasionally happened where people have changed careers, it wasn't because they loved their job and then all of a sudden the plants told them something completely out of left field. This is really revealing a deeper truth that you're going to want to know. You're going to want to know this truth, whatever it is. Like, the ignorance is not a security blanket that you should be clinging to. You should want to know your own deepest truth. It isn't some external force that's applying its own opinion, like talking to your mom about what career you should have.
Right.
Talking to your deepest self about what would make you the happiest. So it's funny how people have these kind of ideas where they hear snippets about someone changing a career after psychedelics, and they're like, "Oh, but I love my career so much." It's like, you'll still love your career.
Obviously you didn't. Obviously you didn't. If you change your career, if you really love your job, you're going to love your job even more. Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, we are creatures of habit. We're creatures of fear, largely. We just like our comfort zone, so we don't want to be disturbed. And that's okay, because organisms tend toward equilibrium, but you got to distinguish between equilibrium, which to me implies balance, and inertia. And inertia is not a good thing, but we spend a lot of our time in inertia, just too damn lazy to change. I think we all have that tendency, and these things are catalysts for change. And on the individual level, on the planetary level, on the species level, and so they are, they're regarded with suspicion by people that have an invested interest in making sure that things stay settled. I mean, Terence used to say, and I totally agree, that psychedelics give you funny ideas. They give you funny ideas, and funny ideas are inherently dangerous. And that it's not because they're toxic or hazardous or any of that. They can be used safely with a little modicum of common sense, but funny ideas overturn societies, and are the seeds of revolution, and they can make you think. Psychedelic experience could lead to, sort of reevaluation of your life situation and the whole even global situation. And you may come out saying, well, this is not working for me. Maybe I don't want to work at this job the rest of my life, so then I can retire and they can take my pension away. And, living your life in a cubicle is not necessarily a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are stuck in that,
No doubt. In Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler's latest book, Stealing Fire, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but they talk about the idea of utilizing psychedelics and other methodologies, non-plant-based methodologies, to get out of ordinary states of consciousness as a fundamental evolutionary drive. And it's not just for humans, it's for animals as well. And they give a lot of examples of other animals. And the reason is precisely what we're talking about here. It's de-patterning. It's patterns of inertia that may have us like lemmings following each other off a collective cliff. Using things that de-pattern this inertia is essential for survival individually and collectively. So, going with the evolution of plants, going along with humanity, we're evolving together. These are the tools to help us de-pattern inertia, which is something that I think is inherently intensely valuable. Take a fresh look, figure out where the momentum, where the addictions, where the habits, where all these things are in your life, and re-enter back into ordinary consciousness with greater awareness of all of these patterns that were before unknown to you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that is the essence of the learning process, with these psychedelics. But it is uncomfortable. Anything that takes you out of your comfort zone or challenges your assumption is uncomfortable. Many people don't want to go there, and unfortunately, I don't know. I don't see. It's just crazy, Aubrey. I do not see society, at least this society, moving away from that. If anything, they're retreating more into that. It's like, and maybe it's just the current historical juncture, the political, environment, but I mean, I'm totally disillusioned with politics. I was pretty disillusioned with it before the election, but now, like, we're seeing the instantiation of this is what happens when politics becomes completely dysfunctional, and it's no longer relevant, and people have this willful, things like stupidity are celebrated. That's the weird thing. It's like, don't bother me with all that science stuff. We know that's, a hoax. I mean, what the hell? This sort of, willful retreat into ignorance. And so they're marching into the future, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror.
Yeah. Things happen, reaction and counter reactions. And, I think some of this retreat may be because the impending catalyst for change that is coming, the awareness and consciousness is also present and around, and it's causing those who are prone to fear to retract to an even more defensive position because the threat of awakening is greater. And so those who are threatened by awakening, they retreat to their most defensive armored posture, imagining the stegosaurus with all the points facing outward, like, right. Things are going to make change. And I think we've certainly seen that, but I think we've seen that a bit as a reaction to, to an awakening. But we've also seen it as an overcorrection as well. On the more liberal side, there's been certainly, in my opinion, an overcorrection of what some of the bad thinking pathways of the past, some of the prejudices that we've had. Overcorrecting for those also causes an overcorrection the other side, and I think so. It's interesting just looking at this force and then counterforce that seems to be happening, but ultimately, things are shaking up, and this, counter reaction and this defensive posture that we're currently seeing will also have the opposite result and then ultimately yield to more awakening, just like the awakening in the 60s yielded to more retraction, which is now yielding to more awakening. It's interesting how we always, like nature herself, yield back to cyclical patterns.
Yeah, it goes in cycles, and I'm not one to say everything liberal is good, everything conservative is not good. I say, a pox on both their houses in a certain way, because it's obsolete thinking. You have to step out of the reference frame. You have to go laterally and think about things, and then you get a perspective that neither of these institutions, are really capable, as long as you stay within that context. I mean, I think the analogy to dinosaurs is interesting, because what is it about dinosaurs? What's the main feature of dinosaurs that we know?
Well, it's the jaws, it's the scales, it's the...
No, they die. Dinosaurs die. That's what they're known for, right? Is going extinct because they couldn't hope. They could not cope.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the sooner the dinosaurs die off, the next generation of whatever takes their place can happen. But the dinosaurs, unfortunately, are holding most of the power, most of the money, most of everything that keeps things going, and they're very afraid, and they're willing to take the rest of the world down with them. That is the scary thing to me. I mean, I feel like these plant medicines are catalysts for change. Catalyst for conscious evolution. And the most meaningful thing I can do, it's a very small thing, but it's meaningful, and it's about all I can do, is to bring people to these medicines and let them have their own encounters. And then it's not my job to tell them what to think. They will come to their own conclusions. But I feel like it's more effective than anything political I might do or anything else. If you could just bring people to these medicines, let them have the experience, and spread this knowledge, right? Plants are very good at spreading. That's what they like to do. So the ayahuasca spread from the Amazon all around the world in the last, 20 years? That's pretty amazing. I mean, this is a co-evolutionary process you're looking at, and it's working fairly fast right now because of the crisis. It's kicking it into high gear because Gaia, the planet intelligence or whatever, recognizes that we got to get cracking on a few things, and in order to do that, we have to change our mindset on a global scale. We have to. I think basically we have to reevaluate, re-understand our relationship to nature. We have to understand we don't run it. It's not here for us to dominate or exploit or all of this stuff that the so-called Judeo-Christian traditions have been filling our head with for, at least 2,000 years. That's completely wrong. And it is that attitude that is contributing to the situation that we have, which is that, either we're completely, lost in delusion, you could say, which is that, well, Jesus is coming anyway, the end days are here, we don't have to worry about nature because that's all going to go away, and our reward is in the kingdom of heaven, right? But I'm sorry, that's a shell game. Yeah, it's a con game.
We're already in the kingdom of heaven. Here we are.
Yeah, we're in the kingdom of heaven, and Jesus is not coming, and the alien
he's already here.
Brothers are not coming. Yeah, we're already here. Nobody's going to save our butts but us.
Indeed.
And it requires that we rethink our perspective to nature and realize that we have to symbiosis, right? My company is called Symbio Life Science. Nature shows that collaboration is the model for evolution, not natural selection and competition. That's a small part of it. Organisms do better when they cooperate. Pretty simple idea, but that's the way it is. And if you look at natural systems on every level, you find symbiosis, which is a close living together of different species for mutual benefits. And you see this everywhere. And but we just have to have the perception. We have to have the ability to step out of our reference frame and look at that, understand that. And I think psychedelics are lenses. You can think of them as lenses for looking at reality. And when you do that, things come, you bring the background forward. We're so used to looking at the foreground because that's that we're trained to do that. That's our survival. Psychedelics enable you to suppress that temporarily, and suddenly things that were in the background, always there, but never noticed, come forward, and you actually see aspects of reality that were there, are actually there. This is not psychedelic delusion, because when you're not stoned, the next day or whatever, the insight or the observation holds up. So, I don't know if you know Simon Powell's work. Have you ever read any of his books?
No, I haven't.
He speaks very eloquently about this. He writes about mushrooms very clearly and very articulately, and also in a very funny way. So his work is quite entertaining. But the point that he makes is that, of course, these things are good for therapeutically, right? I mean, and that's great, but I don't think that's the most important thing about psychedelics. I think psychedelics are learning tools, and they actually are like scientific instruments. They let you look at the world in ways that you never looked at it before, and you learn things about it, actual aspects of reality that normally escape notice. Now, there are a few things that contribute to this. One thing I would say is, if you go into the woods with an indigenous person or a child, for example, because children are open too, but someone who doesn't read, for example, I think has a different perspective on reality. We all like to be literate, and God knows I love books, but having that skill of literacy actually requires that you have to separate yourself from the environment.
Yeah, you symbolicize your reality, right? I mean,
you symbolize it, and you have a point of view. The book is out here, and you're reading it. You're separated from it. Very different, I think, than an indigenous person, experiences reality, because it's all about the visual sense, right? You suppress all these other sensory modalities that surround you always. It's just very interesting. If you go into a natural environment with someone who is really not that literate or not burdened, who is really more indigenous, you can be together. You can be walking through the same forest at the same time. You're in different realities.
I mean, that is really, you get to the heart of the metaphor of getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Like you're in the Garden of Eden when you're one with the environment, and your mind is not playing, the Gowler that's keeping you trapped in suffering and cycles and these patterns of, self-defeating thinking that takes us out of the bliss of being in that present moment. Like that's getting kicked out.
Yeah.
Being back in is being able to shed all of that and actually being fully present with your surroundings, which is, I think, one of these things that we try to find in as many ways as possible, whether it's flow state or psychedelics or any kind of pharmacological intervention. We're trying to escape the burden of our brains and that we've built up, not necessarily our brains, but the mind, the ego self, the identity self that we've built up and tried to stuff with more knowledge and more symbol making and more thoughts and more ambitions and all of this,
right.
Which is really, then we spend the rest of our lives trying to escape that same thing and return to the garden where we can just be one with our environment, enjoy this amazing world we have to explore.
Right. But we do not, I mean, what we do, this separation from nature, this learning process, has been a good thing. I mean, because the trick is we want to return to a state of innocence without forgetting, right? So we want to retain what we learned, and yet be able to move beyond that and recover our innocence and yet retain knowledge. Very tricky thing, right? We had to make sacrifices in order to gain knowledge. We had to leave the garden. Now we want back in.
Yeah.
But we're not willing to give up what we learned, and I don't think we have to give up what we learned. I mean, it's all about we collectively as a species and hopefully as individuals, we're on a path toward wisdom, actual wisdom, which is true knowledge. I mean, I don't know, that sounds silly and new agey, but I think that's what we're, I often say as a species, we're very clever. We're extremely clever as a species. We're not very wise. And this is part of our problem. We've got this disjunct between our cleverness, our inventiveness, our opposable thumbs, our ability to manipulate things, and the wisdom to deploy those things in a way that is beneficial, and now it's getting serious because some of these toys could completely end the whole matter, the whole shooting match. And we have to have the wisdom not to use them if we, even though we can.
It's Einstein's quote, our technology has clearly exceeded our humanity. We haven't been developing the spiritual side, the consciousness to match our technological innovations and our ability to destroy, so, and I think part of that has been these different thought patterns and practices from, the legal systems that have oppressed the greatest teachers that we have available for experiential knowledge, which are these plants, or perhaps religious systems that have enforced, pretty ruthlessly, constricted free thinking and philosophies, and using logic and all of these faculties that we have inherently available, even intrinsically without the plants. All of these I don't think you can underestimate how much that's made an impact. But whatever it is, whatever you want to call the combination of these culprits, we've definitely heightened cleverness and depressed consciousness, and now we have a balance issue. And
and now we have that. That's right. And we I mean, Einstein put it very well when he said that. I think, didn't he also say something like, there are only two things that are infinite in the universe. There are only two things that are infinite. One is the universe. The other is stupidity. And I'm not so sure about the universe.
That sounds like something very, very Einstein.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it. So why do we find ourselves in a historical juncture where, we're facing all these crises, and we need smart people. This is not going to be solved by stupid people. And yet stupidity is celebrated. And actually, the culture in large, at least certain parts of it, looks down on intelligence. It's like, they resent intelligence almost. And it's, that is dismaying, because that is an excuse for denial. And the thing is, denial isn't going to work. These problems are not going away. we have the intelligence and we have to develop the wisdom to deal with these things.
Yeah.
There's the
When I look
disjunct as I see it.
Yeah. When I look at the potential role that humanity can play for the Earth, I mean, Earth needed a species that could potentially be clever enough to protect it from its natural state. We live in a cataclysmic planet where regularly things happen that pretty much wipe out everything, you know, and at some point, inevitably, there'll be another one of these things that come. If the Earth was to evolve a species that was as clever as us, that could possibly create diversions or things that could reduce the damaging effects of these cataclysms, save some species, do the actual version of the Noah's Ark where we captured all these magnificent creations that have taken millions of years of evolution to create, but also had the consciousness not to be the destroyer, not to be the cataclysm itself, then we have a very sacred role. I mean, dolphins and orcas may be intelligent, but they have no chance of stopping an asteroid impact. You know, like we have the chance to mitigate the damages of a giant caldera blowing up and at least preserve some species, even if it's preserving these species on another planet for another, you know, years until ours is ready again, because the clouds of dust have finally gone away. Like we have options to be able to be the shepherds of life, and we just haven't really taken that role. And instead we've taken largely an antagonistic, you know, position, which is you know, something that we need to reverse.
Well, we have been brainwashed by our so-called Judeo-Christian values into devaluing nature, right, and denying biology. You know, I mean, what are the things that the restrictive Abrahamic religions, what's their main no-nos, right? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. These are the things that you shouldn't do. No, these are actually the things that you should do.
These are the things I like to do at the same time.
Because we're biological entities, right? And I mean, you know, I mean, sex, that's obvious. That's what pushes evolution forward on some level. Drugs, we're made of drugs. I'm sorry, we are made of drugs. That's why we enjoy drugs. We're biochemical systems that run on drugs. Rock and roll is metabolism. Rock and roll is oscillation and rhythm. If there's no rhythm in the biological system, it's not interesting. You know why? Because it's dead. You know? Yeah. And so we have been brainwashed to deny biology. And when in fact we should be celebrating the fact that we're, you know, corporal beings. And a lot of this is that you know, the way our minds have been poisoned, this idea that we're somehow a flawed species, original sin and all this. This is more of the con game. We're not flawed. You know, we don't have to have an extraterrestrial come and save us. You know, it just doesn't work that way. So you know, we have to step out of. We have to re-examine that, and the plant teachers are catalysts for this. But it is dismaying that. I don't know. It's just very strange kind of, you know, meme sphere we've entered into at this point. I hope that this is a glitch and it won't, you know, that it's not going to continue. But the idea that there are alternative facts and, no, there aren't alternative facts. I'm sorry. There are facts, and then there are lies and distortions, you know, but this is not you know, also something that you said, and I'm not arguing against it, but I think, you know, in some ways, I don't know if it's our job to save the planet. You know, and we should do what we can to honor our mother for sure. And the planet's our mother. We should treat our mother well. I don't really worry that life on Earth will be endangered by the stupid things that we do. I worry that our species will be highly endangered and, you know, may have to go away. at some point we'll either get rid of ourselves or other factors will, Gaia will say, look, this is, get rid of these monkeys. They're just messing up things. That may happen. I think that life on Earth, Gaia, if you want to call it, I think Gaia is one tough bitch, and I think it's going to be very hard to wipe out life on this planet, but not so hard maybe to wipe us out. And, in some ways that may be the best thing we could hope for, but we're primates. You're a primate. I'm a primate.
Well, we're part of the Earth organism, and we have to decide whether we're a cancer or whether we're a helpful, beneficial part.
Exactly.
It needs to purge cancer, but if we become the healthy part of the organism that it was designed to be, we can be like an immune system.
Yeah, exactly.
A special, helpful force that can, facilitate positive processes in all of the ecosystem. But I think, it goes back to this idea that we aren't nature, that it's man and nature. What the fuck do you mean, man and nature? How do you think, what do you think makes a man? We're eating
How do you
nature.
think we got here? Right.
Nature,
so I think that's a good point. Yeah. It's that is the thing. That's the thing that we have to recognize, is that we're not running things. To the degree that we're advancing evolution, then great. To the degree that we don't, then, that's not helpful. That doesn't mean it will end, but it means that we're making it more difficult than we have to.
And I can't help but think that one of the major missteps of these kind of misplaced religious and social ideas is the idea of unconscious planning of reproduction, and this like kind of uncontrolled population growth. I mean, the idea is that, we shouldn't enter into this with any kind of sense, because we've obviously transcended the natural limitations that keep things in balance. So
right.
The limitations are access to food and, the amount of organisms that you can live symbiotically with because they're supporting you, and the amount of land that it requires to do. We've transcended all that. But instead of putting sensible, conscious bounds upon our reproduction and making it easy for people to have things like birth control methods and all of these things that allow conscious reproduction, we've actually repressed it, because these structures have realized the more people you have as fodder for soldiers, or the more people you have tithing to your church, the more power you have. And so we've exacerbated and just thrown gasoline on this mad unconscious fire where people are just squirting in each other blindly and producing humans at incredible rates, and it's imbalanced to really what the earth can sustain and support. And I think that's one of the areas that we've kind of gotten out of whack, and that used to really, really trouble me, and it still does. And then I talked to an author that's one of my favorite authors named Starhawk, and she's big into permaculture, and she says, well, in permaculture, we have a saying, and the saying is, the problem is the solution. And, I thought about it, and I guess that to me is the only silver lining, that perhaps with all of the damage that we've done, with all of the processes that we've started, maybe at this point we need all of these people to come together and fix it. And the question then is how do you adjust the consciousness of all of these different people? The answer is what we've been talking about this whole time, and it's going to come from the plants. So that's kind of my full circle rant of
one way or another, it's got to come from that, so it's I mean, we're a classic instance of the Chinese curse or blessing. We live in interesting times, that's for sure. And at times I feel like, wow, what a great era to be alive in, because we're probably going to live to see changes that will really determine whether life is going to be able to continue on this planet or not, which is disturbing to think that, I won't see it. I'm too old. You'll probably see it. My daughter will probably see it. I think we'll reach a point where you'll be able to say, well, actually, now we can predict that, these feedback mechanisms that were keeping things stable have been so wrecked that we're going to have positive feedback, and it's going to just go more and more off track. Problem is, when you come with that realization, you're almost too late to do anything about it, and that's dismaying. Where, if the issues, I remember that I was a senior in high school, 1969, when the first scientific article I ever saw on global warming came out in 1960. I mean, I wasn't paying attention to it, but I, would go to the library and in the high school and look at Science magazine every week, and there was this article about global warming, 1969. If we had woken up, if we had gotten on it back then, and some wanted to, we wouldn't be in the pickle that we'd be in today. Right. I mean, but we didn't, because we're a species that doesn't wake up very easily. So,
well, we've prohibited the tools that help us wake up, which is one of the major problems.
Yeah, prohibited those tools and deliberately undermined a lot of the tools that we have. I mean, education is largely a joke. Kids don't learn in school. They don't learn anything useful. And now we're implementing programs to, make sure you don't learn any facts. They want to school vouchers and all this. They want to bring forth these, these religious dogmas and put them into the schools. I mean, they may as well be madrasas. I mean, it's nuts. How about teaching people how to think? There's a concept. Teach people how to think. I understand that this was a few years ago, but I believe it was the Texas state legislature. Did you ever read about this? Actually passed a law that said analytical thinking would no longer be encouraged in schools.
Smart.
What?
Smart. Yeah, that's a good one.
Anyway, so
with all the things that are going on, it can be discouraging, but I think, you have to look at a philosophical ethos and the ethos that you want to have. And this was ultimately the greatest comfort for me. And the comfort is, look, if we're in a battle, if this is a war of consciousness versus stupidity, ignorance, unconsciousness, then the only way to go out is on your shield. Go out, giving it your best, having the most fun, doing the best that you can to change the world, help people have the best life they possibly can. And if we all die, in the process, at least at that point, we can say, you know what? We did it. We fought as hard as we could. We went out on our shield. The forces were too great, but I came in and I went out as a warrior, and I went out with a smile. So hoka hey, motherfuckers, let's go. That's really the only way that we can approach it.
Yeah, I totally agree. What can you do? You do what you can do.
Yeah.
You keep your eyes on it, and you keep your head clear and your ethical compass working, and you hope for the best. I talk about all this apocalyptic and fairly, disastrous, depressing stuff all the time, and people say, well, man, are you a downer? Are you a pessimist? I'm actually not. It's sort of like I'm a pessimist Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and the rest of the time I'm an optimist. I try to balance it out, but I'm not without hope, because I think that, I think the Earth is incredibly resilient. If you look back in evolutionary history, there have been times when it's almost all species have been wiped out. And then usually that's followed by a flourishing of diversity. But these things these happened on millions and hundreds of millions of year scales, so
we see it in a microcosm in a forest fire. A forest fire comes in.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, we can actually see that on that scale.
Yeah.
But in terms of planetary evolution, we can't comprehend that this all is, Gaia's time frame is a lot different than our time frame. And I take comfort in that. It'll be around for a while. We may not be around, but it'll be around.
I agree with that. So tell us a little bit about, what you want to make people aware of. I know you got some big plans in the works, and, I'm sure.
Oh yeah,
Sure,
yeah. I almost forgot to mention it. Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm organizing this conference in the UK, and you can look at the website espd50.com. That's where you'll find the information. There's also a Facebook page affiliated with it. It's a personal thing. It's interesting. The ESPD stands for the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. And in 1967, the US government, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, sponsored a conference called the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs in San Francisco, of all places, in 1967. Private conference, all the people involved in this area of Schultes and Shulgin and Andy Weil even was there. A bunch of people you may never heard of. Many of them are passed on now. But they organized this conference, and they issued this symposium volume from it, which you can find on arrowwood.org. And it was like a landmark publication. And that was the only thing the taxpayer who paid for this ever got from it, was this book. And there were supposed to be follow-up conferences every 10 years. That never happened. The war on drugs came along. The government became, sheesh, we must have been crazy, to sponsor something like this. This is terrible, So they never paid for it. So I've wanted to do part 2, ESPD2 in some form ever since the 30th anniversary, which was 1997. Well, it didn't come together then. It didn't come together in 2007. 2017 is pretty much now or never, and that's the 50th anniversary. And we're doing it. We've got this conference held in the UK. It will be pretty much a closed conference, except that we're going to share it with as many people want to sign up to the Facebook live stream as care to. That part will be free, and we will issue a commemorative collector's edition symposium volume. We're going to reprint the original one and the one from 2017 as a box set, in the spirit of the original conference. And we're already pre-selling that to get money to pay for the conference. And it's working well. We're getting lots of orders. So we're going to absolutely pull this off. And I think it's going to be a great conference. Because 50 years, there's been 50 years worth of research done. And many of the psychoactive plants that were discussed in 1967 were not even on the radar at that time. So it's kind of a snapshot. That was 67. This is 2017. What's the state of the art when it comes to the ethnopharmacologic search for psychoactive drugs? So in some ways, I guess it's a Dennis Mckenna ego trip in a certain way, because I really want to step up and manifest this conference, and I'm happy that I can do that. But the book itself, the original book, was really a big influence on me.
Yeah.
And it's what led me into this area. So it's fun. It's fun.
Outstanding. Well, everybody who's listening, please definitely support the project. I'll provide the links. I'll definitely help you share it out. And
please do. ESPD50.com.
ESPD50.com. Everybody go to get this book. I'm sure it's going to be dope. And you're supporting perhaps the most worthy cause that I can think of right now, which is helping wake people up so we can make this last a little bit longer, because it's too damn fun to end this quick, Dennis.
That's right. That's right.
Damn fun. Well, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Something I've wanted to do for a long time, and so I'm grateful for all your work in the space, and glad we got a chance to connect.
Yeah, me too, Aubrey. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I hope maybe one of these days we can run into each other in South America. I know you go down there often, and you got to drag your buddy down there, and maybe we'll run into each other somewhere down there. I hope so.
I'd love to share a cup with you. That'd be beautiful. So we'll try and manifest that, make it happen.
Okay.
All right, Dennis. Take care.
All the best. All the best.
Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.